You can pray all you want. Tonight, everything here is ours.
San Diego, California, United States. Thursday, October 12th, 2017, 9:49 p.m. What began as just another ordinary night at a small neighborhood market ended in a way that no one could explain. 3 men entered that place with a single intention. The owner believed he wouldn't leave alive, and something happened at the exact moment when all seemed lost. There were no gunshots. There were no screams to call the police, but there was a decision and a presence that changed destinies forever. What you are about to hear today didn't appear in the newspapers as it actually happened. The cameras didn't record it. The reports didn't explain it. But the consequences remain vivid to this day, because that night, Jesus was there. Hello, welcome to this video about untold stories of Jesus, accounts that almost no one knows, moments when everything seemed lost until something impossible happened. Before we continue, I invite you to do something simple yet powerful. Leave an amen in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and write the exact time right now. This helps this story reach more people who need to hear it today. And if this introduction has already touched you in some way, leave a like now, because what happens next, nobody was prepared to experience it. San Diego, United States. The day it all began. San Diego has always been known for its tranquil beaches, consistently blue skies, and a sense of security that made residents believe that the worst would never befall them. The small corner market on Logan Avenue in the south of the city reflected this. A simple place, lit by old fluorescent lamps with hand-organized shelves and a metal bell attached to the door that rang every time someone entered. The market owner was named Michael Harris, a 52-year-old hard-working man, father of 2, known in the neighborhood for helping those in need. He wasn't rich. In fact, the market barely covered the bills at the end of the month. But Michael had something that many didn't: faith. That night, around 9:47 p.m., Michael was about to close. Business had been slow. He was wiping the counter while the old radio behind the cash register played softly a mix of country music and local news. Outside, the wind rustled an old sign that creaked almost imperceptibly. That's when the doorbell rang. Michael automatically looked up, expecting to see a late customer. Instead, he saw 3 men enter almost simultaneously. Hoods pulled up over their faces, oversized jackets, steps too firm for someone who just wanted to buy something quickly. Michael's heart skipped a beat, but he tried to remain calm. "Good evening," he said, with a restrained smile. None of them answered. The first one slammed the door shut. The second one flipped the open sign to closed. The third one stood still, observing every corner of the market like a predator assessing the terrain. It was at that moment that Michael understood. That was no ordinary robbery. "Listen, if you want money, I can get what's in the till," he said, taking a step back, his voice already faltering. The taller man pulled something from his waist. He didn't need to point. He just needed to show it. A weapon. "Shut up now." The voice was cold, practiced, and unhurried. Michael felt his legs grow weak. He thought of his wife. He thought of his youngest son, who had asked for help with his math homework that very day. He thought that perhaps he wouldn't make it home. The second man jumped over the counter and began violently opening the cash register drawer, throwing coins on the floor. The third walked slowly down the aisles, deliberately knocking over products as if he wanted to cause more fear than destruction. "Is that all?" asked the man with the gun, looking at the nearly empty cash register. "Are you kidding me?" "The movement fell through, I swear," Michael replied, his hands trembling. The man took a step forward and pressed the gun against his chest. "Do you think we crossed half the city for this?" Michael felt the cold barrel pierce his shirt. Sweat dripped down his face. Time seemed to have slowed down. Every second hurt. It was at that moment that something inside him broke. It wasn't courage. It wasn't anger. It was utter despair. Michael fell to his knees. The 3 men exchanged surprised glances. "Hey, look at this," one of them mocked. "Are you begging now?" But Michael wasn't begging for money. He was begging for his life. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I have children. I don't want to die here." The man with the gun laughed. "Wrong, my friend. You'll die here here if you don't cooperate." That's when Michael did something that nobody in that room expected. He clasped his hands together, he closed his eyes, and he began to pray. "God, I have nothing left." The voice came out between sobs. "If this is my time, take care of my family. But if there is still mercy, please save us." The market fell silent. None of the men laughed this time. Something strange happened. The third man, who was at the back, stopped walking. He felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but the atmosphere seemed different, heavier, as if someone else was there. The second man swallowed hard. "Dude, let's go already," he murmured. "Shut up!" the leader replied, trying to maintain control. Michael continued praying. "Jesus, if you are here, I trust, even now." At that exact moment, a light flickered on the ceiling, just once. Then everything became still. The gang leader felt something he had never felt before. Fear, not afraid of the police, not afraid of dying. Fear of being watched. He slowly turned his head, as if he were certain someone was behind him, but there was no one there. Or at least, that's what he thought. What happened in the following minutes was never properly reported in the news. The police reports never explained the details. The security cameras had inexplicable malfunctions, but what those men experienced inside changed everything. And what Jesus did next, nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared to see. The silence that made no sense. The silence inside the market was unusual. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a weight. Michael felt as if the air had thickened, as if breathing required effort. His knees were still on the cold floor, his hands clasped together, his sweaty forehead resting almost on the counter. He continued praying, but now the words were no longer organized. They came out as fragments. "Forgive us, have mercy, do not abandon us." The gang leader, known among them as Ray, tried to ignore the strange sensation. He gripped the gun tighter, as if the metal could restore his control. He'd been involved in robberies before, many times, but he'd never felt anything like this. It wasn't nervousness, it was something deeper. "Get up," he ordered, his voice faltering slightly. Michael didn't get up. The second man, Ethan, was standing next to the cashier, but he could no longer move his hands. His fingers trembled for no apparent reason. He felt a tightness in his chest, as if he were about to hear bad news, the kind that changes an entire life. "Ray," he whispered, "something's wrong here." "Stop it," Ray replied, irritated, trying to convince himself that he was still in control of the situation. The third one, Cole, was near the drinks aisle. His eyes kept scanning the room. He would have sworn on his life that someone had walked behind him seconds before, but when he turned around, there was no one there. Even so, the shiver persisted. Michael slowly opened his eyes. He was still alive. The gun was still there, but something had changed. "I'm not going to react," he said with unexpected calm. "Do what you came to do. Just don't take my life." Ray stepped forward, annoyed. "Do you think this prayer will save you?" Before Michael could answer, a dry thud echoed from the back of the market, as if something had fallen. They all turned around at the same time. "What was that?" Cole asked, his voice tense. "It must be a rat," Ray replied too quickly, but none of them believed it. The market was small, organized. There were no stacked boxes that could have fallen over on their own. Nothing should have made that sound. And then came another detail that was impossible to ignore. The clock on the wall had stopped. It was exactly 9:49 p.m. Michael realized that instantly. "That doesn't make sense," he murmured. Ray felt his stomach sink. He approached the clock and slammed the gun barrel against the wall. Nothing. "Stop this nonsense," he shouted, more to himself than to the others. That's when the lights flickered again, this time twice in a row. And for a brief second, something was reflected in the glass of the ice cream freezer. It wasn't any of the three men. It wasn't Michael. It was a silhouette, high, property, observing. Ethan was the first to see it. He took a step back, almost tripping. "Did you see that?" he shouted. "See what?" Ray turned quickly, pointing the gun at the freezer. "Nothing. It's just a reflection of themselves." "You're going crazy," Ray said, but his voice no longer held its firmness. Michael felt a lump in his throat. He too had seen something, not clearly, but enough to know he wasn't alone. "Jesus," she whispered, almost without realizing it. "I know that you are here." Cole lost control. "I'm not staying here any longer," he said, walking quickly to the door. He pulled the doorknob. It didn't open. He tried again. Nothing. "Stop it, Ray," he shouted. "Open this door." "I didn't lock it," Ray replied, now genuinely frightened. Ethan ran to the door and pushed it open forcefully. Closed. The bell above her didn't move. It didn't make a sound at all. Panic began to spread. "This isn't normal," Ethan said, his breath short. "This isn't normal." Ray handed the gun back to Michael. "What have you done?" he shouted. "What have you done?" Michael raised his hands, still kneeling. I just prayed." At that moment, the old radio behind the cash register turned on by itself. A hissing sound filled the air. Then a voice. It wasn't music. It wasn't news. It was a reading. "For I will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil." Ethan fell back onto the floor, sitting down. "Turn that off," Cole shouted. Ray ran to the radio and turned the knob forcefully. The sound didn't stop. The voice continued, firm and calm, echoing through the market as if coming from everywhere at once. Michael started to cry, not out of fear, out of relief. "Psalm 23, he whispered. "I used to hear it when I was a child." The reading ended abruptly. Silence again. So steps, slow, heavy, coming from the central corridor. The three men pointed their guns at the same time. "Who's there?" Ray shouted, his voice breaking. The footsteps stopped. For a moment that seemed eternal, no one breathed. And then a voice that didn't come from any of them spoke. Low, clear, impossible to mistake. "There's still time." Ray felt his legs give way. The gun fell from his hand and hit the ground. Michael lifted his face. His eyes widened, because now he could see. And what lay before them was unlike anything those men had ever faced before. What would happen next would not just be a robbery gone wrong. It would be a settling of accounts. And the real shock was yet to come, when fear ceases to be human. The sound of the gun falling to the floor echoed louder than any gunshot ever would have echoed in that market. Ray stood still, staring at the object as if he no longer recognized what had always given him power. His fingers trembled, his mouth opened, but no words came out. "There's still time." The voice continued to echo in their minds, even after the silence had returned. It wasn't an aggressive voice. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't threatening. And perhaps for that very reason, it was even more terrifying. Cole was the first to move. This isn't real," he murmured, walking backward until he bumped into the liquor shelves. "We're under the influence of something. There's gas here. It has to be that." He laughed nervously, trying to convince himself. "Ray, say something." Ray did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the central corridor, exactly where the footsteps had been heard. Something was there. He felt it. He couldn't see clearly, but he sensed as if someone were standing there, observing every thought that passed through his head. Michael, still kneeling, felt his heart pounding, but not with panic. It was as if a familiar presence had entered the room, something he couldn't explain, but he recognized. "I'm not afraid," he whispered, almost surprised by his own voice. Ethan stared at him, his eyes wide. "What do you mean you're not scared?" he shouted. "Did you see what's happening?" Michael stood up slowly. None of them tried to stop him. It was as if something invisible had imposed limits. "I've spent my whole life afraid of losing everything," he said. "Today, I just asked not to die alone." The market lights began to flicker again, but now at a slow, almost measured pace. Each flicker seemed to mark a second. 9:49 p.m. The clock remained stopped. Cole covered his ears. "Stop it!" he shouted into the empty space. "We're leaving. Take the money. Take everything." He bent down and began throwing items into his backpack with desperate movements, but his hands wouldn't obey. Each item he picked up slipped, fell to the ground, and broke. "Damn it!" he shouted, kicking a crate of bottles. The moment the box fell, all the bottles shattered on their own. None had been touched. The sound of shattering glass caused Ethan to panic completely. "This isn't human," she said, crying. "This isn't human." Ray fell to his knees, the leader, the man who never knelt. He put his hands to his face, breathing rapidly. I didn't want to kill anyone," he stammered. "It was just about the money." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. "You can still get out of here alive," he said firmly, "but not the way you came in." The room temperature suddenly dropped. The air turned icy, visible in their breath. The lights stopped flickering. Everything became clear. And then, in the reflection of the freezer glass, the silhouette reappeared. This time it's clear. A man, simple clothes, serene face, eyes that seemed to hold centuries. Ethan saw it first. He pointed with his finger, his arm rigid. "Behind you." Ray slowly raised his face. What he saw made him let out a scream that echoed throughout the entire market. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a cry of recognition, because somehow he knew who was there. "No," she whispered. "This can't be." The figure didn't move like someone walking. It was as if it simply was there, and had always been there. Michael felt his legs give way and fell to his knees again. "Jeez," Jesus, she said, unable to hold back her tears. The figure tilted its head slightly. He didn't speak, but everyone heard, not with the ears, with awareness. Images began to invade the minds of the three men, moments from the past. Wrong decisions, violence, hurt people, destroyed lives. Cole fell to the ground, writhing. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop, please!" Ethan clutched his chest. "I can't breathe." Ray was crying like a child. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong," she repeated. Michael watched everything, not fully understanding but certain that this was not revenge. It was a revelation. The figure took a step forward. The ground made no sound, and then finally a voice was heard, clear, firm, impossible to forget. "What you did to others, now you see it in yourselves." The entire market seemed to be holding its breath, but the choice is still yours. The figure extended its hand, not in threat, not in condemnation, by invitation. And in that instant, each of them understood that the night would not end the same way for everyone, because not everyone would make the same choice, and what would happen next would leave marks that no camera could capture. The choice that separates those who return from those who stay. The market seemed larger on the inside, not physically but in the feeling of space, as if the walls had receded, giving way to something invisible yet present. The air remained cold and heavy, and no one dared move without feeling watched. The outstretched hand remained there. Ray was the first to react, not out of courage, but because he couldn't take it anymore. The weight of what he saw and felt crushed his mind. He had spent years running from consequences, believing that everything could be solved with force or money. Now neither of those things worked. I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness." The figure did not move, but Ray felt something inside him open up, like an old wound finally being touched. "Then stop running away," the voice echoed, not as sound, but as truth. Ethan watched in silence, his eyes red, his chest rising and falling too rapidly. He was only 26 years old. He had entered that life following the wrong people, believing there would always be time to leave. Now he understood that later had arrived. "If I accept," he asked, trembling, "does that mean I'll pay for what I did?" The response came immediately. "It means you'll live, knowing what you did." Ethan closed his eyes. Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. "Then I accept." He took a step forward. At that very moment something happened. The cold around him lessened. It didn't disappear completely, but it became bearable. The weight in his chest eased, as if someone had removed a huge stone from his heart. Michael realized. "He's different," she murmured. Cole, however, was unable to take a single step. He watched the scene with wide eyes, but something inside him resisted. It wasn't disbelief. It was pride, fear of losing who he thought he was. "This is manipulation," he shouted. "You're messing with our heads." He ran to one of the shelves and tried to grab onto something solid, something real. He knocked over cans, boxes, anything that could prove he was still in control. Nothing worked. "I will not kneel," he yelled. "Never." The figure turned towards him. There was no anger in his eyes, just sadness. And then the market reacted. The lights went out all at once. Total darkness. Michael felt his heart race, but he didn't panic. He knew somehow that it was all part of the process. In the dark, Cole began to scream. "I can't see anything," he yelled. "Ray! Ethan! Where are you?" "Cole, calm down," Ethan replied, trying to approach, but the ground seemed to have shifted. Each step Cole took him further away. He stumbled, fell, and got up in despair. "Get me out of here," he pleaded, his voice already weak. The lights came back on. Cole was alone, kneeling in the center of the marketplace. The others were near the door. Between them, an invisible boundary. Cole tried to get up and cross the street. He couldn't. It was like hitting a shapeless wall. "No!" he shouted. "I've changed my mind. I'll do anything." The voice replied firmly. "Anything, except ceasing to be who you chose to be." Silence fell like a sentence. Ray, still on his knees, wept silently. "I did horrible things," he said. "I destroyed people who didn't even know my name." The figure approached him. "And you know their names now?" Ray nodded. "I remember all of them." Michael felt something he had never felt before. Compassion for the men who, minutes before, had wanted to kill him. "Is he going to die?" she asked carefully, looking at Cole. The response came without cruelty. "He will live with what he rejected." The invisible boundary dissolved. Cole fell to the ground, exhausted, crying like someone who had lost something precious and only realized it too late. The market doors opened by themselves. The bell rang. Once, the night in San Diego returned to life outside. The distant sound of cars, the wind, everything seemed too normal for those who had just experienced something beyond words. "Get out," said the voice. Now, Ethan Ethan was the first to walk through the door. He stopped, looked back and said, "I won't forget." Ray came next. Before leaving, he turned to Michael. "Thank you for praying." Michael nodded, unable to speak. Cole was the last to leave, limping, looking at the ground, like someone defeated not by strength, but by himself. When the three disappeared down the street, the market fell silent once more. The lights stabilized. The clock started working again. 9:50 p.m. As if only a minute had passed. Michael slumped back against the counter, trembling now, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had been through. "Thank you," he whispered. There was no response. But the feeling of presence lingered for a few seconds, and then it was gone. What Michael didn't yet know was that the night wasn't over, because the choices made there would begin to take their toll much sooner than anyone imagined, and the final shock was yet to come, the consequences that no one saw coming. Michael sat behind the counter for several minutes after the door closed. The market was intact, boxes on the floor, broken products, but nothing out of the ordinary for a foiled robbery. Still, he knew that nothing there was normal. His hands were trembling now, not during the terror, not during the prayer, but afterward, when his body finally understood that he was still alive. He stood up slowly, walked to the door, and looked out at the street. San Diego was going about its usual business, cars passing by, streetlights, a couple walking a dog. No one imagined what had just happened inside that market. Michael picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Emergency. What's the incident?" "Attempted robbery," he replied, still breathless. "3 armed suspects. They fled." When he turned it off, he noticed something strange. The security cameras were off, all of them. No red lights flashing, no recordings. "It's not possible," he murmured. He tried calling again. Nothing. The sirens arrived about 8 minutes later. 2 patrol cars. Experienced, alert, but skeptical police officers. Robberies happened every day. "Did they take anything?" one of the officers asked. "No." "Was anyone injured?" "No. Physically, no." Michael hesitated. How could he explain the rest? He only recounted the essentials. The weapon, the threats, the fear. The police took notes, photographed the scene, and were puzzled by the most obvious detail. No weapon on the ground, no sign of a struggle, no images. "Did all the cameras fail at the same time?" the sergeant asked. "Yes, exactly at that time." The police officer took notes, but his expression said it all. It wouldn't make much sense in the report. That same night, miles away, Ethan went to a public hospital complaining of chest pains. Tests showed nothing physically wrong. Even so, he cried uncontrollably. "I need to talk to someone," I told the nurse. "I did some things wrong, very wrong." Shortly after, he asked to call the police. Ray didn't sleep. He spent the night sitting in his car, parked near the ocean. The sound of the waves didn't soothe him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. People he had hurt. People he had never asked for forgiveness from. At 6:12 a.m., he voluntarily presented himself at a police station in San Diego. "I want to confess to crimes," he told the clerk. "All of them." On the other side of town, Cole was in a dark room, alone. He had returned home, but he couldn't turn on the light. He couldn't turn on the television. He couldn't pray. Something inside him was empty. Whenever he closed his eyes, he felt the same invisible barrier, the same feeling of being separated from something that could have saved him. He tried to drink. He tried to sleep. He tried to ignore it. Nothing worked. The following morning, local newspapers reported something strange. 2 gang members turned themselves in after a foiled robbery attempt. The details were confusing. No footage. No clear explanation for the sudden withdrawal. Michael read the news at the market counter, his coffee cooling beside him. He felt a lump in his throat. "So, it was real," she whispered. In the following days, unusual things began to happen. Customers commented that they felt a strange peace upon entering the market. Others said they had decided to change something in their lives after talking for just a few minutes with Michael. A woman returned crying to express her gratitude. "I was about to do something stupid," he said, "but I ended up here by chance." Michael didn't say anything. He just listened. Meanwhile, Ray cooperated with investigations. He handed over names, locations, schemes. He accepted the consequences, even knowing he could spend years in prison. "I don't want a discount," he told a detective. "I want the truth." Ethan entered a witness protection program. Before being transferred, he asked for something unexpected. "I need to go back to that market, just once." When he arrived, he found Michael organizing shelves. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. "Is he still here?" Ethan asked. Michael thought before answering. "He didn't leave," he said, "but he also doesn't stay where he's not wanted." Ethan cried. Cole, on the other hand, began to get worse. Insomnia insomnia, hallucinations, an emptiness that no doctor could explain. He withdrew from everyone until 3 weeks later, something happened. Something that nobody expected. Something that would bring that story to a definitive close. And it would reveal forever that on that night in San Diego, someone really was there. What happened to those who refused? 3 weeks after that night, San Diego had already forgotten the foiled robbery. The news had moved on. New crimes, new scandals, new distractions. But for Cole, time had stopped exactly at 9:49 p.m. He was no longer the same man. His friends drifted away. The gang considered him unstable. He spoke little, avoided enclosed spaces, and never went into a market again. The mere sound of a doorbell would make his body freeze. Cole couldn't explain what he felt. It wasn't ordinary guilt. It was something deeper, like he'd missed a unique, unrepeatable opportunity. Every night, the same dream. He was inside the market. The lights were going out. The door was open, but he couldn't get through. I always woke up sweating, with the feeling of being late for something definitive. In the 4th week, Cole began to hear voices, no orders, no threats, memories. Every cruel word he had ever spoken, every person he had humiliated, every look of fear he had ignored. There was no rest, not even when he was awake. That morning he left home without telling anyone. He walked for almost an hour before realizing where he was going. The market. He stopped across the street. The same place, the same facade, the same door with the metal bell. My heart raced. "No," he murmured. "I can't." But their feet moved forward on their own. When he pushed the door, the bell rang. Michael looked up immediately. For a second, time seemed to bend. "You," Michael said, recognizing him instantly. Cole didn't answer. His eyes were sunken, tired, defeated. "I need to talk," he said finally. "Now." Michael closed the cash register and turned the sign to closed. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a chair. Cole sat down, but he couldn't look Michael in the eye. "I tried to forget," he said. "I tried to pretend it didn't happen." Michael remained silent. "But every night," Cole swallowed hard, "every night I feel like something is waiting for me." Michael took a deep breath. "Are you still afraid?" Cole shook his head. "No, I feel loss." Michael understood. "You know why," he said carefully. Cole clenched his fists. "I know," the voice faltered. "I said no." The market was silent. No customers, no sound except their breathing. "It's not too late yet," said Michael. Cole abruptly raised his face. "Don't lie to me," he shouted. "I saw what happened. I saw the door open. That was my last chance." Michael felt a chill. "Perhaps it wasn't the last," he said. "Perhaps it was just the first time you heard it." Cole started to cry. "I don't know how to go back." Michael approached the counter and placed his hand on the worn wood. "I didn't know how to pray that night either," he said. "I just fell to my knees." Cole was having trouble breathing. "If I try," he asked, "will he show up again?" Michael was honest. "I don't know." The silence stretched on. Cole closed his eyes. "Then I'll try anyway." He knelt down right there on the market floor. Nothing happened. No lights flickered, no voices, no presence in sight. Cole opened his eyes, desperate. "Nothing," he whispered. "There's nothing there." Michael did not respond. Then slowly, Cole began to breathe differently, deeper, less heavily. "Wait," he murmured. I can breathe." Michael smiled for the first time. "Sometimes," he said. "The greatest miracle isn't seeing it. It's feeling when the weight starts to lift." Cole stood there for many minutes. When he stood up, something had changed. There was no complete relief, no total peace, but there was direction. "Thank you," he said before leaving. That night, however, something happened. Cole was found unconscious in his apartment after a suicide attempt that was not completed. The medical report was straightforward. Patient claims to have felt that it wasn't his time. He survived, and upon waking, he uttered the first sentence he had spoken since the incident. "He didn't give up on me." When Michael heard the news, he sat on the counter and cried, because now he understood. The final shock of that story would not be death, nor punishment. It would be something much bigger, and it would happen where no one expected it. The minute that never existed. The official report stated that the robbery at the Logan Avenue market lasted less than 2 minutes. That's what was recorded in the police files, in the formal statements, in the cold documents archived in San Diego. 2 minutes, nothing more than that. But Michael knew that night couldn't be contained in minutes. 3 months passed. The market remained open every day at the same time. The marks of what had happened had been repaired, shelves replaced, products restocked, new cameras installed. Everything seemed normal, too normal. But there was something that never went back to normal. Michael. He continued working as usual, but now he observed people with different eyes. Each client seemed to carry an invisible invisible story, a burden, a fear, a silent plea for help. And he began to notice something strange. Something always happened at exactly 9:49 p.m. No flashing lights, no voices, no visions. People who would walk into the market at that exact time and, for some reason, start talking. Spontaneous confessions, unexpected tears, decisions made right there in the cereal aisle or near the ice cream freezer. A woman dropped her phone on the counter and said she wasn't going to make the same mistake again. A man asked to call his son after years of no contact. A teenager returned something he had stolen weeks earlier without anyone accusing him of it. Michael never provoked. He never asked questions. He just listened. Until one quiet night, someone entered at 9:48 p.m. Michael looked up. It was Ray, handcuffed. 2 police officers accompanied him. It wasn't an ordinary visit. Ray had requested it as part of a plea bargain, a final request before being transferred to another prison. "I just need to go inside for a minute," Ray told the police officers. "It's important." Michael felt his heart race. The police allowed it. Ray entered. The bell rang. 9:49 p.m. Ray stopped in the middle of the market. He took a deep breath. "Here," he said. "It was here." Michael nodded. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," Ray continued. "I came to say thank you." He closed his eyes for a moment. "If that night had ended differently, I would be dead or worse." Michael felt tears welling up in his eyes. "You made a choice," he said. Ray smiled weakly. "I know." The police officers led him outside. When the door closed, Michael looked at his watch. 9:50 p.m. Later that same night, the market's phone rang. It was the hospital. Cole had asked to speak with him. "I'm leaving here tomorrow," Cole said, his voice weak but firm. "I don't know what my life will be like, but I know it goes on." Michael hung up and sat in silence. That's when he realized something he had never noticed before. The camera recording. He had installed a new, more modern system. Curious, he decided to review the footage from that old night, not to prove anything but to try to understand. The video showed exactly what the report said. 3 men enter. Michael kneels. They run out. Nothing more. No flashing lights. No silhouettes. No presence. But something was impossible. Time. Between the moment Michael fell to his knees and the moment the men walked out the door, the video was exactly 60 seconds long. 1 minute. Michael felt his body go cold because he knew. That night had lasted much longer than that. He closed the file. He turned off the monitor. And finally, he understood. It wasn't the market that was spared. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even his life. It was the right time. Time was suspended so that choices could be made, so that lives could be redirected, so that no one could later say they didn't have a chance. Michael turned off the lights in the market and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked inside one last time. He didn't see anyone, but he felt it. "Thank you," he whispered. The bell rang when he closed the door. On the street, San Diego remained indifferent, but in that small market, 1 minute that didn't exist had changed everything.